Hi there, and welcome back to another Dynamic Leader conversation. So, today's conversation, which is why uncomfortable conversations are so uncomfortable, reflects a lot of conversations that I'm having with many leaders this year around having those challenging, awkward, uncomfortable chats with their staff. And so I want to address, like, what is the awkwardness? What is the discomfort? Where is that coming from? And then what do I do with that? So I think the first question I would offer, if you're feeling like a conversation is going to be uncomfortable, then the first question I would ask you to ask yourself is, what is it about it that is feeling so uncomfortable? So if I'm feeling nervous about an upcoming conversation, what for? My body is telling me to be nervous for some reason. And I think we don't pay enough attention to this. I think we feel a little bit nervous and we don't sit with that. We don't explore that any further. We just accept, okay, I'm about to have a conversation that is going to make me nervous by default, and therefore it just is, as opposed to saying, well, hang on a second, does it have to be uncomfortable? How much of it is in my head versus how much of it is the reality of the situation? How can I understand a little bit more about that before I go into the conversation? Or, more to the point, before I avoid the conversation? Because so often, if I'm feeling nervous about a conversation and I know that it's going to be uncomfortable, and then I know I don't like being uncomfortable, or I don't like creating the feeling for other people to be uncomfortable, then I'm going to probably avoid it. I'll do things that sabotage me from having that conversation. So I'll pack my calendar out, or I won't set the conversation up in the calendar. Um, I might drop hints. I might skirt around the edge. I might justify something away, the topic of the conversation. I might justify it away and put it down to, well, it was just the moment, or it was the particular person at that time, or something is passing, it'll fix itself. And so I want to just explore each of those elements and just see whether we can come up to or come up with a little bit more insight for us to either go forward and step into the discomfort, or make the decision to say, this is not the conversation I want to have, and then I can step back from it. So when you ask yourself, what is it that I am feeling uncomfortable about, then, you know, the follow-on question or the answer to that is, is it that I don't want to make them upset? Is it that I don't want them to dislike me? Is it that I've got to this stage with my culture and my team, and we've got really good vibes, and I don't want to do anything to get in the way of that? And so I think there is this, like, connection element that comes in with that, maybe a little bit of people pleasing, maybe a little bit of, I like the relationship is really important, and therefore I don't want to do anything that is going to compromise that. And so this is where I think our hesitation or the discomfort comes from. What happens sometimes when we have uncomfortable conversations is that rapport will break in the moment. Now, if we think about rapport as being the unconscious, automatic connection that we have with another person or another group of people, it's all about looking for sameness. And so often what I see is leaders who don't like it when rapport breaks. When rapport breaks, you feel an immediate disconnect. I mean, that's the whole the whole notion, is that it's an unconscious automatic disconnection from someone else. And so you will get a feeling when that happens. There will be an energy shift. There will be probably a physiology shift. There might be a shift in the tone, or the pace, or the types of words that are used in a conversation. A lot of it is body language. A lot of this disconnect is unspoken. And so when rapport breaks with another person, you will feel that energy shift. Unless you're completely oblivious, you will notice that something just happened there. I'm not really sure what it was. I can't put my finger on it, but the mood has adjusted. If we are not aware enough that it is a break in rapport, and that break in rapport can actually be a good thing at times, then what we'll try to do as leaders is we'll try to make it right. We'll try to fix it. We will try to repair whatever it is that we think we've broken. We'll over talk, we'll over explain. A lot of the time we nullify the things that we've just said, except that we've done damage to the connection by doing that. And so when I'm working with this concept with leaders, I talk about the difference between relationships and rapport. So if you can imagine that the relationship, it is longer term, it is it's more conscious, it's more considered, it either is strengthened or diminished over time through interactions. And to begin a relationship, we need to have a lot of rapport. So if we want to have a good relationship with someone, we want to have deep, trusting connection, then the more instances we have where we are in rapport, the better. Because we're seeing sameness, we're seeing some kind of alignment with us and them. And so we feel like they get us. We feel like they understand who we are, and that that we understand them, etc. So relationships will strengthen over time, or they'll weaken over time, depending on that level of rapport. Sometimes it requires a break in rapport to strengthen a relationship. For example, if I want to talk to you about boundaries that maybe you've stepped over or you're not honoring or respecting, then I can expect that there will be a break in rapport in that conversation. I will want to talk to you about, this is my boundary, this is why it's important to me, this is how it helps to contribute to my wholeness and my well-being and my contribution. And this is what I've asked from you, and this is what I'm receiving, and it's not aligned, and it's not okay, and something needs to change, or I need to hold you accountable for that, if that's the scenario. You can absolutely expect for rapport to drop at that point in time. I guess the challenge is to be able to sit in that broken rapport about something that is really important to you, that if you don't have fulfilled, will probably damage your relationship anyway. So if you look at the life cycle, or what the future looks like with a relationship where you're not actually respecting my boundaries, and I don't want to break rapport with you, so I don't have this conversation, but our relationship erodes over time, and actually we get to the point where the relationship becomes toxic and there's no going back from that. So I think sometimes we don't think about the longer term effect of not having those conversations. So we've got to understand, like, is this conversation important for me and the other person? Is this relationship with this other person important enough? And if it is, then absolutely I can expect a break in rapport. What I don't need to do is recreate rapport in the moment. And so what I talk about is, if you've got a good relationship that has been evolving over time, where you have moments where you're in rapport and then moments when you're outside of rapport, that relationship will continue to strengthen if there's more times where there's rapport than when there isn't. When we have to have these conversations where rapport breaks, we have to trust that the relationship is strong enough and healthy enough to sustain the break in rapport. And if we do that, and if we allow rapport to break, and if we just sit and hold the space, we don't have to say anything about it. We just have to share what the thing is that we're wanting to share. And then we just want to stop talking. I think this is where we get into trouble. Is the stop talking and the hold the space. We try to manage the outcome, and we can't manage the outcome. Certainly not their response, anyway. And so that's the first thing around, those uncomfortable conversations is, do I trust the relationship is strong enough to hold the break in rapport and for us to get stronger after the fact? And so for those that are not great with holding people accountable, or engaging in that, you call it healthy conflict if you want, or even just the challenge. So high challenge is where you've got an approach and I've got an approach and they're different. And when we have differing views on things, then rapport is going to break. And so if I don't want that to happen, then it means that I'm going to need to concede what my views are and maybe conform to your way of things. And if that's what you want to do and that serves you well and it keeps you happy, then awesome, keep doing that. But I think for most people, we've all got this idea of the life that we want to live and how we want to engage and interact in the workplace. And I think that if we're not talking about this, if we're not having conversations where rapport does break, then we're not being true to ourselves and we're not actually being true to the connection we have with other people. So if we go back to the point around, is it because I don't want to upset them or I don't want them to dislike me or I won't want to affect the culture, then we've got to understand that avoiding the conversation is only a short-term solution. Longer term, there's going to be some damage. Only longer term, if we don't do anything about it in the moment, longer term, we might not be able to save it. Longer term, we might not be able to come back from it. The other component, so there's that difference between rapport and relationships and being able to trust one or the other. There's this other part, which I see a lot of leaders kind of working in an unhealthy way, and that is this responsibility continuum. And I've spoken about this previously as well. So feel free to go back and listen to that episode. But when we are too responsible for things that are not actually our responsibility, when we are trying to protect people from themselves, or we're wanting to avoid hurt feelings, or we're wanting to avoid people feeling any kind of pressure or discomfort themselves, we can overcompensate. And so our need to be responsible for things that are not ours to be responsible for is a really big driver for people not engaging in those conversations that are a bit uncomfortable. But again, it's a little bit like, the parent who protects their children from any kind of hurt or disruption, at school. How does that, when we protect them from that, how does that set them up to be able to deal with that in the future themselves? Is what we're doing right now creating a stronger, more resilient, more perseverant, more kind, more strong version of ourselves in the future? And so this need to be over responsible for other people can be really damaging longer term. Short term, you might feel like you're satisfying some need, but longer term, either they will not have the levels of resilience and perseverance and perspective that they need to survive and thrive in other environments, and or you will burn out with exhaustion because it's not sustainable being responsible for things, for everything, for everyone, which can feel a little bit heavy when we're in that leadership space. But so that's probably the first key thing is I'm feeling uncomfortable because I'm worried about what they will think of me after, what will happen. There's this other part though. Sometimes an uncomfortable conversation will feel uncomfortable because it's not right. It doesn't feel it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel fair, it doesn't feel aligned, it doesn't feel just. And sometimes that feeling, there's something in that, and it's worth a deeper look. So if you are thinking to yourself, I get that I don't want to upset them, but it's not about that. It's not that I don't want to upset them. And it's not that it's going to have an effect on the culture. It doesn't matter whether they like me or not. If I don't feel right about the conversation, even when I've explored well, is that just about me and my need to please or my need to be responsible? Then the question is, like, what's going on about that? I think that it's worth pausing on. I don't think all uncomfortable conversations have to be had. I think that sometimes the uncomfortable conversations are uncomfortable because they are potentially self-serving, or they are unfair or unjust and they don't make sense, or it's not the right timing as you work through or as you progress through leadership. Sometimes a senior leader will say to you, you need to do something about this person because this is what I've seen in the results and the sort of the macro level um, outcomes. You, as their leader and someone who works more closely with them, are hearing what your manager is saying, but it doesn't sit right. It's like, I can't have that conversation with them now. That doesn't make sense. I've seen a lot of leaders who have had really escalated conversations that hasn't made sense. So, for example, I can be going about doing my thing. Maybe I'm not achieving my results, but you as my leader aren't saying anything. You're giving me encouragement and you're sort of positively trying to move me in the right direction, but I'm not picking up what you're putting down. And so rather than you gradually increasing the pressure by saying, hey, like, what do you think is going to happen if this continues? What is it that you need? What's the shift you need to start making the shift? Is that you might go straight to, okay, you haven't had an improvement in your performance. We're going to put you on performance management. That conversation doesn't make sense at that point in time because there's not an obvious escalation of the conversation. So that's where it can feel uncomfortable. If there is a really unreasonable shift in the way that we're having conversations with people, and it's not expected. So when you catch people by surprise, when they feel blindsided, when they won't know it's coming, when it's not the natural progression of things, that is where you're going to get into trouble. And so if you're pausing on having an uncomfortable conversation and you decide, actually, this is the reason, then don't have the conversation. Have the next level of that conversation, and then the next level after that, and the next level after that. So the conversation that you might be wanting to have in the moment might actually need to be the third or fourth conversation that you have with the person instead of the very next conversation. I hope that makes sense. So before you have the conversation, the question I want you to ask yourself is, for what purpose am I having this conversation? Another question that you might ask yourself is, who is the focus of the conversation? If it's about me, then I need to adjust my approach. So if the focus of the conversation is me doing what my manager has asked me to do, or me doing what I expect myself to do as a leader, then I need to really sit with that for a little while. I need to kind of consider that, is it okay for me to approach it this way if it's going to be a learning opportunity for me, knowing that I might actually affect the relationship that I have with the other person? And so you have to be okay with it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have any conversation at any point in time, but it's giving you the opportunity to build awareness around the conversations that you are having. So am I okay with how I'm showing up with this person? And am I okay with how this person's going to perceive my intentions after I have this conversation? So do I need to be a little bit more flexible in my behavior? Um, I remember, so just recently, I actually, my daughter had a bit of a meltdown in the car. Um, and, she threw out a sausage roll that I'd bought her for lunch, out of spite. She was really frustrated. And it's because she got woken up, and she doesn't wake up very well. And so she threw her sausage roll in the bin, which upset me. And then she had a donut. So she's a bit of a sweet tooth. So she's more than happy to eat a donut and throw out the savory thing. And so when she threw out her sausage roll, I then threw out her donut. And yeah, she lost it. And so, but she was able to reflect on the action that she took. I was able to reflect on the action that I took. And what I noticed is that for her, it's really important to feel like she's in control and that she has choice and that she's not being pressured into things. So I recognize what her trigger was. I also recognize my own triggers around wasting of food. And in order to make my point around that, I had to waste food myself. And so it was a really awkward situation. But we had the conversation after the fact, and we were able to talk about like what happened there for you, what happened there for me, what's acceptable and what's not. And so definitely rapport was broken in the moment. It was probably broken for a good 45 minutes after that point. They went through a whole bunch of emotions, both her and myself, and we were able to come to this mutual understanding for each other. But we had to go into this space of discomfort, and I really had to understand like what is mine versus what is hers. I mean, I think that that's really helpful for uncomfortable conversations. It's like what's going on for me at the time versus what's going on for them, and is it my job to um, predict, or I think it's okay to predict, but is it my responsibility to manage the response or the reaction that I receive? And if I'm doing that, am I doing that intentionally? And so there's this real intentionality around showing up for an uncomfortable conversation. I think the other thing with uncomfortable conversations is the awkward silences that come. I think any conversation that you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about is when someone stops speaking. Leaders often feel the need to fill the space, to keep talking and avoid the silences. I think it's important to appreciate that silence is what helps people to go within and appreciate the part that they've played. So with my daughter and the sausage roll, there was a really long period of silence. We were driving, so it didn't make it as awkward as what it possibly could have been. But the silence allowed for some introspection. So it allowed my daughter to go internally with her thoughts and her feelings. It allowed me to go internally with mine, and how did that play out for me as a mum, and what would I do next time, and really take the lessons from that. If you're a leader and you're sitting, opposite each other, or you're in the same space and there's an awkward silence, my first suggestion is sit with it, be able to hold the space. I think that's ultimately your role as a leader is, can I just hold the space, whatever is needed for the space, and not for me, but more the person that I'm actually having the conversation with, because I know where I want the conversation to go. They don't know what's coming for the conversation. So I have to give them the space to catch up, or to get to the point where I am at, or even get to their own point, wherever that is. There might be a time where I can't resist the temptation to talk. If you get to that point and you need to say something, there's a really beautiful question that you can ask, and this has served me well in a number of scenarios, and that is in a really kind, gentle, calm, curious tone, is that you say to them, "What's going on for you right now?" And you say it with genuine interest. It's not about pretending. People will see right through that, but it's really just asking them, what's going on for you right now? And I'm not presupposing anything. So I'm not planting anything. You look like you're upset with that. I know this is really hard for you to hear. I appreciate this must be a challenging time for you. None of those are good questions. They all imply that you know about them, and that will piss people off. Or at least it will it'll increase the gap between you and them. And that's not what you want. You want to be able to bring back the connection at some point. And you know what? It might not even be something you say during that conversation. You might not say it at all. You might come back to it at a later stage. Maybe you just allow the silence to sit there for long enough and just say, would you like some extra time? Should we come back to this, and allow that to happen? But what's great about, what's going on for you right now is that it allows the other person to verbalize how they're making sense of it. And so the good thing about this question is that as a leader, I can calibrate on whether the message that I was intending for them has actually been received or not. And, what is it that they're doing with that? Now, if the message hasn't been received, then I might want to give some more information around that or create some more clarity. But most of the time, people are thinking things through and they're sharing what's going on for them. Oh, yeah, that you've just made me realize something, or I didn't know that was a problem, or that makes me feel really sad or annoyed or frustrated, or whatever it is, that any response to that question is fine. And the most important thing for you as their leader or as a leader is that you don't try to justify anything that happens in response to that. So, what's going on for you right now? They might say, well, I'm just really annoyed that you, as my leader, didn't let me know about this earlier. And so that we don't justify or make things better, that we say, thank you for that insight. Let me sit with that. Um, Perhaps there's some introspection for you at that point, or perhaps there is an opportunity to say, well, yes, I could have done that. But as the person in your role, what were the opportunities for you? And so when someone tries to shift the conversation away from themselves and make it about you, so they'll try to shift the blame, is that you can say, okay, that's something for me to consider, but that's not the topic of the conversation today. Today's conversation is about what you've got control over. And so if we're just looking at what you're in control of and the part that you played, I'm curious about that. And so we can keep the conversation going. And because I've done the thinking before the conversation, I've gone, is this an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had? Or is this an uncomfortable conversation because it's just not the right time? And I'm only having the conversations that need to be had, that I can still hold the space. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of, our job is to be able to hold the space and to remain curious and kind. The other thing is, are our conversations uncomfortable because we're trying to have one type of conversation but delivering it in the wrong way? And so, another topic that I talk about is, the four conversations that we're having. So I talk about the four conversations that leaders need to be having on a regular basis, and they are the getting to know you conversation, which is very different to the second kind of conversation, which is around setting and managing expectations. So often an uncomfortable conversation is uncomfortable because we haven't had either a getting to know you conversation or an expectation setting conversation. So before you have the uncomfortable conversation, ask yourself, do I know who I'm speaking to? Do I understand them at a personal level? And second, do they know what's expected of them, or is this going to totally blindside them? And if the answer is uh, it's going to blindside them, or they don't kind of have that connection with you, then maybe I start with that conversation and I push the uncomfortable conversation out by a couple of weeks, if you can. But I think we should always be working on the getting to know you and also setting and managing expectations. The last two conversations, so they're the first two are getting to know you and expectations. The third and the fourth are accountability conversations and feedback conversations. An accountability conversation should always be expected. So I promise to never have an accountability conversation with you if you don't understand or know what is expected of you first. And I need to understand that you do completely get that and that you've committed to delivering on what you've um, committed to, or understand your expectations and can deliver on those. So an accountability conversation is fairly straightforward when we say, hey, remember that commitment that you made. And I would suggest that entering any accountability conversation with hey, remember that commitment that you made. Remember the commitment that you made when you joined the organization to live and breathe the values. Remember the conversation we had last week about your performance metrics and what was required for you to succeed in your role. Remember when we had a conversation and I asked you if you could do this thing by this date at this standard, and you said yes. And I asked you whether anything would get in the way of that, and you said no, not at all. That should be achievable. Is that I'm going to hold you accountable to that, because if nothing else, that's my role. My role is to make sure that the commitments that you make are not in vain, or they're not flippant, or they don't lose the integrity that they're wrapped in. And so accountability conversations are all about me helping you to serve the function, to serve yourself, to serve the culture, to serve the values of the organization. And then you have feedback conversations, which I think when an accountability conversation is dressed up as a feedback conversation, that's going to feel uncomfortable because you're not wanting to give them feedback. You're actually wanting to hold them accountable. And they're two very different conversations. A feedback conversation is, how can I help you to be a better version of yourself? And I can see how accountability and feedback, the lines may blur. But if you say a feedback conversation is optional, an accountability conversation is not. A feedback conversation might be, a feedback conversation is for greater improvement and an advancement forward. An accountability conversation is a correction in how someone has behaved or responded, or something that they haven't done that they've committed to doing. And so a feedback conversation is one that takes place with permission. So I get to ask, would you mind if I offered you some feedback? And that I give you the context around that, and that I keep that feedback really clean. And if you want to know more about that, there is also a podcast episode on giving feedback that you can listen to. When I give you feedback that is clean, it's current, it's with context, you will thank me for that. You may not thank me in the moment, but it'll be something that will help you hopefully see what's in your blind spot, maybe make you aware of something that you weren't aware of previously, or that you were aware of but didn't understand the impact that it was having. And so feedback is a beautiful way to move people forward. Accountability is a beautiful way to correct behavior that has led to a commitment not being followed through, which really challenges the integrity of a person, of a role, of an organization. The impacts or the effects of doing that are quite great. And so when we're conscious of the 4 types of conversations that we can have, and we're setting ourselves up to go into those conversations with purpose and with intention, usually what comes out the other side is really helpful, and it is really healthy. So I want to finish this conversation by saying that good, healthy, open conversations take practice. They take time. They take a little bit of planning. I think they take some awareness of self, but it's time and it's practice again and again and again and again. And the more you practice, the more aware you'll be of yourself and how much you affect the outcome of the conversation. And the more aware you are, the better you become at having these conversations. And if you can learn to have these conversations from a good place, and always focus on kind and strong, and you're speaking to another human being who is imperfect, just like you are, but is a learning machine, just like you are, then conversations won't be that uncomfortable. And if they are feeling uncomfortable before it, it's a sign that either you're growing a new skill, or you probably shouldn't be having this conversation yet. Maybe there's a conversation before that one that you need to have. And so you become less impatient about getting straight to the point, straight to the topic of conversation that you want, and you meet them where they're at with a conversation that's going to help them to progress from their perspective. I think discomfort is about growing the new skill. So if it's just uncomfortable about the break-in report, then appreciate that that's what it is, and trust that the relationship that you have with them is going to help you and serve you through those conversations. uh, always approach conversations from this opportunity to elevate and create the environment for people to be the best version of themselves, and that we're not destroying the confidence or making people question who they are. I think as human beings, it's really easy to knock the wind out of someone and make them question everything that they're doing. And I don't think that's the purpose of having these kinds of conversations. I think uncomfortable conversations are needed, but I think they've got to be approached with good awareness, good intention, and a real focus on what you want the outcome to be for you and the other person collectively. So hopefully that topic of conversation is relevant for you. I would love to hear your feedback and your comments around this. And I look forward to another dynamic leader conversation with you all soon. Thanks.